G'day, Andrew Murray from Apartment Specialist talking about Auckland apartment sales. Now I just recently had an owner sell an apartment that was in a residential tenancy, and then they came to selling the apartment, and I told them to go and ask their accountant for advice, and they found out that they had GST owing on the apartment and they couldn't figure it out. And to everybody else it seemed, I mean, on the surface it looked like, well, why would you owe GST on their Auckland apartment? Why would they owe it? It's in a residential tenancy. But it came down to when they purchased the apartment. So some apartments have GST connected to them because when they were initially purchased, they were purchased as a commercial property. And what I mean by that is the owners would have been receiving GST. So a lot of people, when they first bought their apartments, weren't too sure what they were buying, especially through all the outfits like Blue Chip and all that kind of thing. And so they found out when they come to sell the apartment that there's a GST component. And this really, really changes your decision-making process. So if you think about it, GST being on an Auckland apartment, if you sell it for say 400,000, well that's 15%. So that's $15,000 times 4. That's $60,000 less than you thought you would have got in the hand. So the way to tell that is when you purchased your apartment, was it being used commercially, or was it intended to be used commercially? So was it in a hotel lease, or was it in a lease of some form? And were you receiving GST on that income? So if it was in a hotel and you're receiving income, now that means there is a GST component. So that means you owe GST. Now what happened is basically when you bought the apartment and it was sold as a commercial apartment or with a commercial lease on it, you would either have had the price reduced by the GST factor, which back then would have been 12.5%, or your accountant will advise you that you can claim the GST. And often, having an accountant, we let them do what they do and they save us money, but we don't always understand exactly what they do. And so they would have claimed that $12,500 back, and you would have got that money. So when it comes to sell a property, you have to pay that GST back. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that, and I'll explain that into my next podcast, which is when you have GST on an apartment, but you don't actually have to pay that GST back. And I'll be talking about that later. But the key thing is, if any of this is actually ringing a bell when you purchase your apartment, make sure you ask your accountant, because they'll give you the advice and let you know if there is a GST component attached to your apartment, and that will change, no doubt, your decision-making process on whether it's the best idea to sell your apartment at this current time or what other things can be done. Anyway, hope that helps, and talk soon. Cheers.